He lost his company, his friends, and his family, until a cat found him on the street. The wind cut through Asheville's empty streets like a blade, carrying the metallic scent of approaching winter and the greasy aroma from the 24-hour diner that never seemed to sleep. Marcus sat on the curb, staring at his reflection in a puddle that rippled with each passing car, seeing a stranger where his confident self used to be. 3 months ago, he'd been untouchable in glass-walled boardrooms, cutting people off mid-sentence, letting his phone buzz when family called because the deal was always more important. Now, hunched over with his hands buried deep in coat pockets that held nothing but lint, he felt pride sting more sharply than hunger. The sound of small paws on wet pavement broke through his thoughts. A grey tabby with white patches across his chest approached cautiously, amber eyes catching the neon light from the diner's sign. The cat paused just out of reach, head tilted as if studying this broken man who'd lost everything to his own arrogance and obsession with success. "Go away," Marcus muttered, not wanting witnesses to his fall from grace. But the cat didn't move. Instead, he sat down and began grooming his paw with deliberate calm, as if he had all the time in the world. There was something unsettling about that patience, the way those golden eyes kept returning to Marcus's face between licks. A light paw touched his hand. Marcus jerked back, surprised by the gentle contact. The cat had moved closer, close enough that Marcus could see the intricate patterns in his fur, the way white blended into grey like watercolors bleeding together. When their eyes met, Marcus felt something shift inside him, a rusty gear that hadn't turned in months beginning to creak back to life. "Calder," he whispered, the name appearing from nowhere, like a half-remembered dream. The cat's purr was immediate and profound, a sound that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than his small chest. Calder, yes, that was definitely his name, stepped forward and rubbed against Marcus's leg with the confidence of an old friend. Marcus found himself reaching down to stroke the soft fur, his calloused fingers rediscovering gentleness. When had he last touched something without expecting something in return? When had he last given comfort instead of demanding it? "Where did you come from?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. He'd barely spoken to anyone since the bankruptcy lawyers had finished picking apart his life like vultures. Calder meowed once, a sound that seemed to say it didn't matter where he'd come from, only where they were going together. The diner's bell chimed as a late-night customer entered, and warm yellow light spilled across the sidewalk. Marcus felt the cold more sharply then, the way it seeped through his jacket and settled in his bones. He'd been sleeping in the county shelter when beds were available, under bridges when they weren't, pride preventing him from calling anyone who might remember the man he used to be. Calder seemed to sense his discomfort. The cat looked toward the diner, then back at Marcus, then toward the diner again with unmistakable intent. "I can't afford anything in there," Marcus said, embarrassed to admit poverty to a cat. But Calder was already walking toward the entrance, tail high with confidence. He paused at the door and looked back, waiting. Against his better judgment, Marcus followed. The warmth hit him like a physical embrace, carrying scents of coffee, bacon grease, and apple pie that made his empty stomach clench with need. The diner was nearly empty, just a trucker hunched over eggs at the counter and a waitress refilling sugar dispensers with practiced efficiency. "We don't allow pets," the waitress called out without looking up. Marcus started to turn away, but Calder had already claimed a corner booth, settling onto the cracked vinyl seat like he owned the place. His posture radiated such calm authority that even the waitress paused in her routine. "He's well-behaved," Marcus said weakly, sliding into the opposite seat. The waitress approached, coffee pot in hand, studying them both with tired but kind eyes. She had silver streaks in her brown hair and worry lines that spoke of long shifts and hard-won wisdom. "Before we continue with the story, I want to ask you for something very special. Please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and leave a comment. Every single action makes a difference and helps our project grow." "Haven't seen you before," she said, filling the cup without being asked. "I'm Helen." "Marcus." The name felt strange on his tongue. He'd been nobody for so long. Helen's gaze moved to Calder, who was sitting perfectly still, amber eyes following her every movement. "And who's this handsome fellow?" "Calder." The cat meowed softly at the sound of his name, and Helen's stern expression melted into a smile. "Well, aren't you polite? Let me see what I can find in the kitchen." She returned minutes later with a small dish of water and some leftover chicken, setting both in front of Calder, with gentle hands. The cat touched his nose to her fingers in thanks before beginning to eat with delicate precision. "On the house," Helen said, then looked at Marcus with eyes that had seen too many broken people to judge. "For both of you." She brought him soup and a sandwich without fanfare, the simple kindness hitting harder than any grand gesture. Marcus ate slowly, tasting food instead of just consuming fuel for the first time in months. Across from him, Calder finished his meal and began grooming again, the sound of his purr a steady comfort in the fluorescent-lit space. "You're not from around here," Helen observed during a quiet moment between customers. "Charlotte originally had a consulting firm there." The words came easier than expected. "Lost it all when I got too comfortable, too careless with other people's money and trust." Helen nodded without pity or judgment. "Mistakes have a way of teaching us what we need to learn, even when the lessons hurt." Calder looked up from his grooming and fixed Marcus with those penetrating amber eyes, as if agreeing with Helen's assessment. There was intelligence there, a depth of understanding that seemed impossible in such a small creature. The diner's door chimed again, and a group of construction workers entered, their voices loud and cheerful despite the late hour. Calder's ears flicked toward the sound, but he remained calm, watching Marcus's reaction more than the newcomers. "You got a place to stay?" Helen asked quietly. Marcus shook his head. "The shelter when there's space, otherwise." He gestured vaguely toward the streets. Helen's expression tightened with concern, but before she could respond, Calder stood up on the seat and walked across the table to Marcus's side. The cat settled against his arm, warmth radiating through the thin jacket. "He's chosen you," Helen said with certainty. "Cats know things we don't. They see what's worth saving before we see it ourselves." Marcus looked down at Calder, who had begun purring again, the vibration traveling through his body like a tuning fork striking his heart. For the first time in months, he felt something besides despair, a tiny spark of purpose, the foreign sensation of being needed. The construction workers were debating shift schedules, their conversation drifting over the quiet booth. One of them mentioned a job site needing temporary help, good pay for someone willing to work hard and show up on time. Marcus found himself listening, really listening, instead of letting words wash over him like meaningless noise. Calder's purr intensified, as if he sensed the change in Marcus's attention. When Helen brought the check, she leaned close enough to whisper, "There's a community meeting tomorrow night at St. Mary's. People helping people, if you know what I mean. 7 o'clock. Marcus wanted to refuse. He'd been to enough meetings, heard enough advice, received enough pity to last several lifetimes. But Calder stretched and placed a paw on his hand, amber eyes meeting his with unmistakable expectation. "I'll think about it," he found himself saying. Helen smiled and cleared the dishes, leaving them with refilled coffee and the comfortable silence of understanding. Outside, the wind had calmed, and the first hints of dawn touched the horizon with pale light. Calder remained pressed against Marcus's side, radiating contentment and warmth. For reasons he couldn't explain, Marcus felt his chest loosening, the tight knot of shame and failure beginning to soften. This cat, this strange, confident creature who'd appeared from nowhere, seemed to believe in possibilities that Marcus had forgotten existed. As they prepared to leave, Calder jumped down from the booth and walked directly to the community bulletin board near the exit. He sat beneath it and looked back at Marcus, tail twitching with purpose. Marcus approached and found himself reading the posted flyers for the first time in months. Job opportunities, support groups, volunteer positions, housing assistance. Information he'd been too proud or too defeated to seek out, laid out like a roadmap for someone ready to try again. Calder meowed once and headed for the door, clearly expecting to be followed. The morning air carried the crisp promise of autumn as Marcus and Calder walked through downtown Asheville, the cat padding beside him with the confidence of a tour guide. Marcus had spent the night under the shelter of a church alcove, sharing his thin blanket with his new companion, who had pressed close against him whenever the wind picked up. Now, watching Calder navigate the sidewalks with purpose, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months, curiosity about what the day might bring. Calder led them to Pack Square, where the Saturday farmers market was beginning to stir to life. Vendors arranged displays of late-season vegetables, homemade breads and crafts that caught the morning light. The cat seemed fascinated by the activity, watching with bright eyes as people greeted each other with genuine warmth. "You hungry again?" Marcus asked. Noting how Calder's attention kept drifting toward a stand selling fresh-baked muffins, the vendor, a woman with flour-dusted aprons and kind eyes, noticed them hovering at the edge of her booth. "He's beautiful," she said, nodding toward Calder. "Such unusual markings." Marcus felt a flush of something he recognized as pride. "His name's Calder." "I'm Sarah," she said, extending a hand. "And you are?" "Marcus." Sarah studied them both with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen many stories unfold at the market. "First time here?" "We're just looking around." Calder, meanwhile, had spotted something that captured his complete attention. He approached a small display of pet treats, sitting down directly in front of them with perfect posture. His message was unmistakable. Sarah laughed. "Smart cat. These are made by Mrs. Patterson from organic ingredients grown right here in the county." She selected a small fish-shaped biscuit and offered it to Calder, who accepted it with dignified gratitude. "I can't pay for anything," Marcus said quietly, the admission burning his throat. "Didn't ask you to," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "Sometimes sharing is its own reward." As if understanding the gift, Calder moved to Marcus's feet and began weaving between his legs, purring loudly enough to draw smiles from passing shoppers. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the cat's obvious affection for his human. "How long have you had him?" asked an elderly man with a walking stick. Marcus hesitated. Had it only been a day? It felt like Calder had always been part of his life. "We found each other yesterday." "Best kind of relationship," the man said with a knowing smile. "The ones that just happen naturally." A young mother with a toddler stopped to watch Calder, who had settled into his favorite position pressed against Marcus's leg. "Look, honey," she said to her child. "See how much the kitty loves his daddy?" The word daddy hit Marcus unexpectedly hard. He'd wanted children once, back when his ex-wife Sarah had still believed in their future together. Before work became his only priority, before success became his only measure of worth. Calder seemed to sense his emotional shift. The cat stood and walked a few feet away, then sat down and began grooming his paw with deliberate care. But his amber eyes never left Marcus, and there was something almost intentional about the performance, as if he were giving Marcus space to feel without being overwhelmed. A woman approached from a nearby booth, selling handmade soaps and candles. She had silver-streaked hair and wore a flowing scarf that caught the morning breeze. "Excuse me," she said to Marcus, "but are you the man who was at Helen's diner last night?" Marcus tensed, unsure if recognition was welcome or dangerous. "Why?" "Helen's my sister. She mentioned you and your cat. Said you might be looking for work?" "Possibly." "I'm Linda. I run a small cleaning service, offices, small businesses, that sort of thing. Not glamorous, but it pays honestly." She glanced at Calder, who had finished grooming and was now sitting at perfect attention. "I could use someone reliable, especially during the busy season coming up." Marcus felt a familiar surge of pride. He'd run his own company, managed million-dollar budgets, advised Fortune 500 executives. Cleaning offices felt like admitting complete defeat, but Calder stood up and walked directly to Linda, allowing her to scratch behind his ears while purring loudly. The cat's acceptance felt like an endorsement. What would it involve? Marcus heard himself asking. 3 evenings a week to start. 5 buildings downtown, mostly small law offices and accounting firms. 4 hours each night, $15 an hour. Linda's tone was matter-of-fact, businesslike. Cash payment? No questions asked about your situation. The money wasn't much, but it would cover food and occasional shelter fees. More importantly, it was work. Purposeful activity that might help rebuild some sense of self-worth. When would I start? Tomorrow night, if you're interested. Meet me at 327 College Street at 6. Bring the cat if you want. Some of these offices are overrun with mice anyway. After Linda left with his uncertain agreement to show up, Marcus found himself sitting on a bench while Calder explored the immediate area. The cat had developed a habit of wandering just far enough to investigate something interesting, then returning to check on Marcus before venturing out again. During one of these circuits, Calder froze near a young man who was sitting alone against a building wall holding a cardboard sign. The cat approached slowly, then sat down just out of reach, the same cautious but interested posture he'd shown Marcus the night before. Marcus watched the interaction with growing understanding. The young man, probably early 20s with hollow cheeks and clothes that had seen too many nights outdoors, looked at Calder with the desperate longing of someone who'd been invisible for too long. "He's beautiful," the young man said when Marcus approached. "His name's Calder. I'm Tyler." The introduction came with visible effort, as if he'd forgotten how to initiate human contact. Calder solved the social awkwardness by walking directly to Tyler and settling against his leg, purring with the same intensity he showed Marcus. The young man's face transformed with wonder and gratitude. No one's touched me in weeks, Tyler whispered, his hands shaking as he stroked Calder's fur. People look right through me. Marcus felt a painful recognition. 3 months ago, he'd been one of those people who looked through the homeless, too busy with his own importance to acknowledge their existence. Now he saw Tyler's humanity with startling clarity, the intelligence in his eyes, the careful way he held himself, the dignity maintained despite circumstances that would break most people. "How long have you been out here?" Marcus asked. 6 months. Lost my job at the furniture plant when they downsized. Couldn't make rent. Had to choose between car payments and apartment. Chose wrong. Tyler's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd told the story too many times. Calder remained pressed against Tyler's leg, his purr a steady comfort. Marcus found himself sitting down on the other side of the cat, creating a small circle of shared understanding. "There's a meeting tonight at St. Mary's," Marcus found himself saying. 7 o'clock. Community support group. Tyler's smile was bitter. "I've been to those meetings. They're full of people who want to help but don't know how, and people who need help but are too proud to ask for it. Maybe that's exactly why we need to be there," Marcus replied, surprising himself with the words. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both men drawing comfort from Calder's presence. The cat seemed completely content to serve as a bridge between their separate loneliness, his purr creating a bubble of peace in the chaotic market atmosphere. When it came time to leave, Tyler looked stricken. "Will I see you again?" Marcus hesitated, then made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "We'll be here tomorrow morning. Same time." Tyler's relief was palpable. "Thank you, both of you." As they walked away, Marcus felt Calder's subtle weight against his leg and realized the cat had engineered the entire encounter. The way he'd approached Tyler, the timing of his affection, the comfort he'd provided, none of it had been random. "You planned that, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Calder looked up with amber eyes that seemed to hold infinite wisdom, then continued walking with his tail held high. That evening, Marcus found himself standing outside St. Mary's Church as 7 o'clock approached. The building was old stone and stained glass, with warm light spilling from its windows onto the sidewalk. Calder sat beside him, perfectly calm despite the unfamiliar surroundings. "We don't have to do this," Marcus muttered, but even as he spoke, he knew they did. Something had shifted in him during the day, a recognition that isolation wasn't protecting him from anything. It was just prolonging his suffering. The meeting was held in a basement room with folding chairs arranged in a circle. About 20 people of various ages sat around the perimeter, their faces carrying the weight of different struggles, but united by a willingness to try. A woman with graying hair and gentle eyes welcomed newcomers and explained the group's simple philosophy: listen without judgment, share without shame, support without conditions. Marcus chose a chair near the back, Calder settling at his feet with characteristic composure. Several people smiled at the cat, and Marcus felt some of his tension ease. When it came time to share, stories emerged that mirrored his own pain. Job loss, addiction recovery, family dissolution, financial ruin, health crises that had upended carefully planned lives. Each person spoke with raw honesty, their voices growing stronger as they continued. When the informal spotlight reached Marcus, he felt his throat close with panic. But Calder stood up and placed his front paws on Marcus's knee, amber eyes meeting his with steady encouragement. "I'm Marcus," he began, his voice barely audible. "I lost everything because I forgot what actually mattered." The words came slowly at first, then in a rush that left him breathless. He talked about his failed company, his broken marriage, the pride that had prevented him from asking for help until it was too late. He talked about sitting on that curb last night, convinced his story was over. "Then this cat showed up," he said, looking down at Calder, who was purring loudly enough for the entire circle to hear. "And somehow he made me remember that maybe I'm not finished yet." The response was immediate and warm. Not pity, but recognition and encouragement from people who understood exactly what he meant. After the meeting, several members approached to exchange contact information and offer specific help. Job leads, housing resources, invitations to coffee that came without strings attached. Walking home through the quiet streets, Calder pressed close against Marcus's leg, providing warmth and companionship. The night felt different somehow, less empty, more full of possibility. "You knew I needed that, didn't you?" Marcus asked his feline companion. Calder's only response was to purr louder, but Marcus was beginning to understand that the cat's wisdom often came without words. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose between isolation and connection. But tonight, for the first time in months, Marcus fell asleep believing that tomorrow might be worth waking up for. The last thing he saw before closing his eyes was Calder's amber gaze, watchful and protective, as if standing guard over dreams that were finally worth having. Marcus arrived at 327 College Street 10 minutes early, Calder padding quietly beside him through the evening shadows. The building housed 3 small businesses, a law office, an insurance agency, and an accounting firm that smelled permanently of coffee and stress. Linda met them at the entrance, her practical demeanor immediately putting Marcus at ease. "He's welcome," she said, noting how Calder investigated the lobby with professional interest. "Mr. Henderson's office upstairs has been complaining about mice for weeks." The work was methodical and solitary, exactly what Marcus needed. While Linda showed him the routine for each office, Calder explored with careful curiosity, always returning to check on Marcus before venturing into new territory. By the second night, the cat had established a pattern. He would patrol each floor while Marcus cleaned, occasionally appearing with small offerings, a pen that had rolled under a desk, a paper clip that had been dropped, once even a computer mouse, the electronic kind, that someone had left in the wrong office. "He's like a quality control supervisor," Marcus told Helen during their regular late-night diner visits. The routine had become sacred. Work until 10, then share a quiet meal while Calder held court from his favorite booth. "Cats see what we miss," Helen replied, refreshing his coffee. "They notice patterns, inconsistencies, things that don't belong." It was during his second week of cleaning that Marcus discovered exactly what she meant. While emptying trash cans in the law office, he noticed discrepancies in the billing records scattered across one lawyer's desk, the kind of irregularities that had been his specialty to catch back when he'd run his consulting firm. Numbers that didn't add up, expense reports with suspicious patterns. Calder materialized beside the desk and sat down, fixing Marcus with an expectant stare. "I'm not a consultant anymore," Marcus said quietly. "I'm just here to empty trash and vacuum floors." But the cat remained perfectly still, those amber eyes holding steady pressure. Finally, Marcus pulled out a piece of scrap paper and made some quick notes, nothing invasive, just observations that might prevent someone from making expensive mistakes. He left the anonymous note on the lawyer's desk with a simple message: "Thought you might want to double-check these expense reports. A friend." 3 days later, Linda met him with unusual excitement. "Mr. Williams wants to meet with you. Says someone left him information that saved his client $30,000 in fraudulent charges." The meeting was awkward at first. Marcus sat across from the lawyer's mahogany desk. Calder settled in his lap, trying to explain his background without revealing the full scope of his fall from grace. "You have a good eye for detail," Mr. Williams said, after hearing a carefully edited version of Marcus's credentials. "My regular bookkeeper is retiring next month. It's part-time work, but it pays well for someone with your skills." "I don't have an office or proper equipment," Marcus began. "You can work here in the evenings. The cleaning job pays for your time. This would pay for your expertise." Williams smiled at Calder, who was purring with satisfaction. "Besides, your assistant already seems comfortable with the space." The bookkeeping work brought Marcus back into contact with skills he'd thought were permanently buried. Analyzing financial patterns, catching discrepancies, organizing chaos into comprehensible order. It felt like finding a lost part of himself. More importantly, it was help that people genuinely needed, not just ways to maximize profits at others' expense. Calder became an integral part of the evening routine. He would settle on the desk while Marcus worked, occasionally walking across papers as if reviewing them, sometimes knocking pens toward specific documents that needed attention. Clients began asking about the office cat, and several mentioned that Calder's presence made the intimidating legal environment feel more welcoming. Tyler had become a regular part of their morning routine at the farmer's market. Marcus would bring coffee and a sandwich from the diner, and the 3 of them would sit together while Calder divided his attention equally between his 2 humans. The young man had started looking healthier. his hollow cheeks filling out slightly, his clothes cleaner thanks to access to the church's shower facilities. "He's getting you back on your feet," Tyler observed one morning, watching how Calder supervised Marcus's interactions with the various vendors who'd grown fond of the unusual pair. "We're getting each other back on our feet," Marcus corrected. It was true. Tyler's perspective on street life had taught Marcus practical lessons about surviving with dignity, while Marcus's slowly recovering professional skills helped Tyler navigate bureaucratic challenges like applying for benefits and housing assistance. Calder seemed to orchestrate their conversations, moving between them with purposeful affection, creating connections that neither man would have initiated alone. The first real test came on a Thursday evening in November. Marcus arrived at the office building to find Mr. Williams waiting with a manila envelope and a troubled expression. "I need you to look at something confidential," the lawyer said. "A case that requires discretion and expertise I'm not sure I can provide." The envelope contained financial records for a local non-profit that worked with homeless veterans. The organization's board suspected embezzlement, but needed proof before involving authorities. It was exactly the kind of forensic accounting work Marcus had built his reputation on, back when he'd had a reputation worth building. "I understand if you're not comfortable with this level of responsibility," Williams said carefully. Marcus felt Calder shift in his lap, the cat's weight settling against him with complete confidence. Those amber eyes met his with unmistakable encouragement. "I'll need access to 3 years of records," Marcus heard himself saying. "Bank statements, expense reports, payroll records, everything." The investigation took 2 weeks of evening work, Calder maintaining silent vigil, while Marcus reconstructed the financial story hidden in spreadsheets and receipts. The embezzlement pattern was sophisticated but not perfect, small amounts diverted consistently over 18 months, disguised as legitimate expenses but revealing telltale inconsistencies when analyzed properly. Marcus compiled his findings into a comprehensive report, complete with evidence trails and recommended actions. When he presented it to Mr. Williams and the non-profit's board, their relief was palpable. "This documentation will save the organization," the board president said. "More importantly, it will protect the veterans who depend on our services." The success brought Marcus more than professional satisfaction. Several board members mentioned the investigation to their colleagues, and word began spreading through Asheville's business community about a skilled financial analyst who worked with discretion and integrity. Calder seemed to sense the shift in Marcus's confidence. The cat began spending more time during their evening office sessions, sitting upright in a chair beside the desk, looking for all the world like a business partner reviewing documents. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Marcus asked one evening, noting how Calder's purr intensified whenever new clients called to discuss potential projects. The cat's response was to walk across the desk and settle directly on top of the current financial report, amber eyes gleaming with satisfaction. By December, Marcus was earning enough from part-time bookkeeping work to afford a small studio apartment. It wasn't much, a single room with a kitchenette and a bathroom that needed coaxing, but it had heat, running water, and most importantly, no restrictions on pets. The night they moved in, Marcus sat on the floor with Calder curled in his lap, looking around their modest space with something approaching contentment. The apartment came furnished with basic pieces that had seen better decades, but it felt like a palace after months of uncertainty. "We did it," he said quietly, scratching behind Calder's ears. "We actually did it." Calder's purr was his only response, but it was enough. The real celebration came a week later when Tyler called with news that he'd been accepted into transitional housing. The program provided a private room and job training assistance, with the possibility of permanent placement after 6 months. "I never would have applied without you pushing me," Tyler said during their final morning meeting at the farmer's market. "Both of you." Calder submitted to Tyler's grateful attention with dignified grace, allowing the young man to hold him close while emotions threatened to overwhelm the moment. "This isn't goodbye," Marcus said firmly. "We'll still see each other around town." "I know," Tyler replied. "But it's different now. We're all moving forward instead of just surviving." That evening, alone in their new apartment, Marcus reflected on the changes that had occurred since that night when Calder had first touched his hand. The cat had somehow engineered an entire network of connections. Helen at the diner, Linda with her cleaning business, Mr. Williams and his legal practice, Tyler, and the reminder that everyone deserved dignity regardless of circumstances. Each relationship had been built through small gestures of trust and mutual support, none of them dramatic or life-altering on their own, but collectively transformative. Calder stretched and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of downtown Asheville twinkling in the distance. When Marcus joined him, the cat pressed against his leg with familiar warmth. "What's next?" Marcus asked quietly. Calder's amber eyes reflected the city lights, and Marcus had the distinct impression that the cat already knew the answer to that question. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose connection over isolation, purpose over self-pity. But tonight they had a home, meaningful work, and a growing network of people who cared about their well-being. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The call came on a Tuesday morning in January, while Marcus was updating expense reports for a small construction company. Calder sat on the desk beside him, methodically grooming his paw with the focused precision that usually meant he was thinking about something important. "Marcus, this is David Chen from Pinnacle Consulting." The name hit Marcus like cold water. Pinnacle was one of Charlotte's premier financial consulting firms, exactly the kind of company he'd once competed with and occasionally beaten for high-stakes contracts. "We've heard about your work through some mutual contacts. We have a situation that requires someone with your particular expertise, and we're wondering if you might be interested in a short-term contract." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "What kind of situation?" "A client needs forensic accounting work on a suspected embezzlement case, similar to that non-profit work you did in Asheville, but much larger scale. Six-figure potential loss, complex offshore transfers, the kind of investigation that requires serious expertise." The money they mentioned made Marcus's part-time bookkeeping income look insignificant. More importantly, it was recognition from peers who knew his reputation, an acknowledgement that his skills still had value in the professional world he'd been forced to abandon. "The catch," David continued, "is that we'd need you in Charlotte for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. Full-time commitment, corporate client, high-pressure environment. Are you available for something like that?" Calder stopped grooming and fixed Marcus with an intense amber stare, as if sensing the magnitude of the moment. "Can I call you back this afternoon?" Marcus asked. After hanging up, he looked at Calder, who had moved to the window and was watching birds with apparent casualness. But Marcus was beginning to understand the cat's moods well enough to recognize when Calder was thinking. "It's good money," Marcus said aloud. "Real work. The kind I'm actually trained for. A chance to rebuild my professional reputation." Calder's tail twitched once, but he didn't turn away from the window. "But it would mean leaving you here. 2 weeks, maybe longer." That got the cat's attention. Calder turned to face Marcus directly, amber eyes holding an expression that seemed almost like concern. The morning clients included Mrs. Patterson from the farmer's market, who brought her small business books for quarterly review. She'd started paying Marcus to organize her rapidly growing artisanal pet treat business, and her enthusiasm for expansion was infectious. "These numbers look fantastic," Marcus told her, reviewing the sales figures. "You're definitely ready for that second location we discussed." "I couldn't do any of this without your help," she said gratefully, "and Calder's supervision, of course." The cat had positioned himself on a chair beside the desk, looking official and attentive. Several of Marcus's regular clients had started asking specifically for appointments when both consultants would be available. After Mrs. Patterson left, Marcus tried to focus on other work, but the Pinnacle offer kept intruding on his concentration. It represented everything he'd lost and desperately wanted to recover: professional respect, financial security, the validation that came from solving complex problems that mattered. But it also meant leaving behind everything he'd built in Asheville. Not just Calder, but the entire network of relationships that had become his foundation. Helen at the diner, Mr. Williams and his law practice, Tyler in his transitional housing program, the other members of the Tuesday night support group. Calder seemed to sense his internal conflict. The cat abandoned his usual afternoon nap to stay close to Marcus, purring steadily whenever anxiety made his hands shake. That evening, Marcus walked to the Tuesday support group meeting at St. Mary's, Calder padding beside him through the cold streets. The basement room had become a second home, filled with people who'd watched him transform from broken and desperate to cautiously hopeful. When it came time to share, Marcus found himself talking about the job offer without meaning to. "It's everything I thought I wanted," he admitted to the circle. "Professional validation, serious money, a chance to rebuild my career. But," prompted Janet, the group facilitator. Marcus looked down at Calder, who was settled at his feet with typical composure. But I'd have to leave all of this behind. The life I've built here, the people who matter to me, and my cat. Cats are portable, suggested Tom, a carpenter who'd been in recovery for 6 months. This one isn't just a pet, Marcus said quietly. I can't explain it properly, but he's been the center of everything good that's happened to me. Taking him away from the place where he chose to save my life feels wrong. The group listened without judgment as Marcus worked through his confusion aloud. Some members offered practical advice about pet travel and temporary relocations. Others focused on the deeper question of what constituted success and whether financial achievement was worth sacrificing personal relationships. "What does your gut tell you?" Janet asked finally. Marcus looked at Calder again, who was watching him with those incredibly expressive amber eyes. "My gut says the old Marcus would take the job without hesitation and figure out the personal details later, but the old Marcus lost everything that actually mattered." Walking home after the meeting, Marcus felt no closer to a decision. The rational choice was obvious. Take the contract, rebuild his financial foundation, then return to Asheville in a stronger position. But every time he imagined leaving Calder behind, even temporarily, something in his chest twisted with unexpected pain. That night he called his ex-wife Sarah for the first time in over a year. "Marcus?" Her voice carried surprise and wariness in equal measure. "Hi, Sarah. I know this is unexpected. I'm sorry to call so late." "Are you okay? You sound different." He found himself telling her about Asheville, about Calder, about the slow process of rebuilding his life from nothing. She listened without interruption, and he could hear something shifting in her tone as he spoke. "You really have changed," she said finally. "The Marcus I was married to would have taken that job offer without a second thought." "That's what I'm afraid of," he admitted. "What do you mean?" Marcus looked at Calder, who had settled on the windowsill and was watching snow begin to fall outside. "I'm afraid that if I go back to that world, I'll become that person again. The one who thought success meant never saying no to money or recognition." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember our last fight, before the separation?" He did. She'd accused him of loving his career more than his family, and he'd responded by working late for the next 3 weeks to prove his priorities were correct. "I told you that you'd lost sight of what actually mattered," she continued. "You said I didn't understand ambition. I was wrong. Yes, you were. But Marcus, running away from professional challenges isn't the answer either. The question is whether you can handle success differently now." After they hung up, Marcus sat in the dark apartment with Calder purring in his lap, watching snow accumulate on the windowsill. The cat's warmth was a steady comfort, but the decision still felt impossible. The next morning brought clarity in an unexpected form. Marcus arrived at the office building to find Tyler waiting outside, looking agitated and desperate. "I screwed up," Tyler said immediately. "The housing program. They're threatening to kick me out." "What happened?" "I missed 2 job training sessions because I was sick, but I didn't report it properly. They're saying it shows lack of commitment." Tyler's hands shook as he spoke. "I tried to explain, but they won't listen. I need someone who understands their bureaucracy, someone they'll respect." Marcus felt Calder press against his leg with subtle pressure. The cat had developed a habit of providing physical support whenever Marcus faced important decisions. "Let me make some calls," Marcus said. He spent the morning navigating the housing program's administrative maze, using skills honed through months of helping various Asheville clients deal with bureaucratic challenges. By noon, he'd managed to arrange a meeting with Tyler's case manager and had prepared documentation that presented Tyler's situation in the best possible light. The meeting went well. Tyler's case manager agreed to a probationary extension, acknowledging that Marcus's advocacy had helped clarify misunderstandings in Tyler's file. Afterward, sitting in the diner with Tyler and Calder, Marcus felt something click into place. "Before we continue with the story, I want to ask you for something very special. Please subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and leave a comment. Every single action makes a difference and helps our project grow." "You saved my spot in the program," Tyler said gratefully. "We helped each other," Marcus corrected. "That's how it works now." Helen brought their usual order without being asked, pausing to scratch Calder's ears. "You 3 look like you've had a productive morning." "We figured some things out," Marcus said, looking at Calder, who was purring with satisfaction. That afternoon, Marcus called David Chen back. "I'm honored by the offer," he said. but I'm not available for a full relocation. However, if Pinnacle has clients who need remote forensic accounting work, I'd be interested in discussing project-based contracts. David sounded disappointed but not surprised. Remote work is more complicated for this type of investigation. I understand, but my circumstances have changed since my Charlotte days. I have commitments here that I can't abandon. After ending the call, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Complete certainty about a professional decision. He'd chosen connection over ambition, community over financial gain, and for the first time since his company's collapse, he felt proud of his business judgment. Calder seemed to approve. The cat had claimed his usual spot on the desk and was watching Marcus work with an expression that looked remarkably like satisfaction. 2 days later, David Chen called back. "We've been thinking about your situation," he said. "What if we could structure something different? Project work you could handle remotely, with occasional travel to Charlotte for critical meetings. Not as lucrative as full relocation, but it might work for both of us." Marcus looked at Calder, who was sitting upright in his supervisory chair, amber eyes bright with interest. "I'd need to bring my consulting partner," Marcus said impulsively. "Your partner?" Marcus scratched behind Calder's ears, earning a loud purr. "He's very good at quality control. Catches details that others miss. Non-negotiable part of the package." David's laugh was surprised but genuine. "I think we can accommodate that." That evening, Marcus celebrated by cooking a proper dinner in his small kitchen, while Calder supervised from the counter. The apartment felt more like home than anywhere he'd lived since childhood, filled with the comfortable presence of someone who'd chosen to stay, despite having every reason to leave. "We did it again," he told Calder, who responded by head-butting his hand with affectionate force, found a way to move forward without leaving what matters behind. Outside, the snow had stopped, and Asheville's lights twinkled through the clear winter air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to balance ambition with connection. But tonight, Marcus felt something he'd never experienced during his first career. The confidence that came from making decisions based on love rather than fear. Calder settled in his lap, purring with the deep satisfaction of a job well done. Spring arrived in Asheville with dogwood blossoms and the kind of soft rain that made everything smell like new possibilities. Marcus stood at his apartment window, watching Calder observe the world with the focused attention that had become so familiar over the past year. The cat had grown sleeker and more confident, his grey and white coat glossy with health, amber eyes bright with the contentment that came from knowing exactly where he belonged. The remote consulting work with Pinnacle had evolved into something Marcus had never expected, a sustainable balance between professional challenge and personal fulfillment. He worked on complex financial investigations from his Asheville base, traveling to Charlotte twice a month for client meetings, always with Calder in a specially designed travel carrier that the cat had initially viewed with suspicion but now accepted as part of their routine. "Ready for today's meeting?" Marcus asked, straightening his tie. Calder stretched and walked to the door with purposeful strides. Today marked the 1-year anniversary of their first encounter, and Marcus had arranged something special to commemorate the occasion. The downtown office space Marcus had leased was modest but professional, 2 rooms with large windows that let in plenty of natural light, and most importantly, a comfortable window perch where Calder could survey his domain while Marcus worked. The nameplate on the door read, "Chen and Associates Financial Consulting," in simple black letters, with a smaller sign below that read, "Calder Quality Assurance." Tyler was waiting in the small reception area, looking professional in his new job training uniform. The transitional housing program had led to permanent placement at a local credit union, where his attention to detail and genuine empathy with customers had quickly earned recognition. "He's really doing this?" Tyler asked, grinning at Marcus. "He insisted," Marcus replied, setting Calder's travel carrier on the desk. "Said it was time to make things official." The appointment was with a lawyer from Charlotte who specialized in business incorporation. Marcus had decided to formalize his consulting practice, but with an unusual twist that reflected everything he'd learned about what actually mattered in life. "Mr. Chen," the lawyer said, arriving precisely on time, "I understand you want to establish a limited liability company with some unique provisions." "That's correct. Chen and Associates Financial Consulting, LLC, standard business structure, except for one detail." Marcus opened Calder's carrier, and the cat emerged with dignified composure. "I want Calder listed as an official business partner." The lawyer paused, pen halfway to paper. I'm not sure that's legally possible. Animals can't enter into contracts or hold business ownership. Then make him the company mascot with a formal title and benefits package, whatever works legally. But I want his contribution officially recognized. Helen appeared in the doorway carrying a tray of coffee and sandwiches from the diner. Figured you might need refreshments for the paperwork signing. She'd become more than a friend over the past year. She was Marcus's unofficial business advisor, the person whose practical wisdom had guided him through the transition from employee to entrepreneur. Her presence at today's meeting felt essential. The lawyer worked through the paperwork with good humor, creating what he called the most unusual business filing in North Carolina history. Calder supervised from his perch, occasionally walking across documents as if reviewing terms and conditions. There, the lawyer said finally, Chen & Associates is officially established, with Calder holding the title of Chief Morale Officer and Quality Assurance Supervisor. Marcus signed the papers with a flourish, then held out the pen toward Calder. Your turn, partner. The cat delicately touched his paw to the signature line, leaving a small print that the lawyer dutifully witnessed and notarized. That evening, the entire support group gathered at the diner for an impromptu celebration. Helen had closed the restaurant to regular customers, transforming it into a private party space decorated with handmade banners that read, Congratulations, Chen & Associates. Marcus looked around the room at faces that had become his chosen family. Tyler, thriving in his new job and permanent housing. Mrs. Patterson, whose pet treat business had expanded to 3 locations. Mr. Williams, who'd become both client and mentor. Janet and the other support group members who'd witnessed his transformation from broken to whole. A year ago, I was sitting on a curb thinking my life was over, Marcus said, when called upon to make a speech. Then this cat showed up and reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that success isn't about what you achieve alone, it's about what you build with others. Calder settled in his lap, purred loudly enough to earn laughs from the gathered friends. He taught me that real strength comes from vulnerability, that asking for help isn't failure, and that sometimes the most important victories are the quiet ones that nobody else notices. The celebration continued late into the evening, filled with stories and laughter that reflected the deep connections formed through shared struggles and mutual support. Marcus found himself thinking about his ex-wife, Sarah, who'd visited Asheville the previous month to see his new life firsthand. You've become the person I always hoped you could be, she'd said, watching Calder supervise Marcus's work with obvious pride. I'm glad you found each other. They weren't reconciling. Too much had changed for both of them, but they'd found a friendship built on genuine respect and shared recognition of growth. She'd even suggested that their divorce had been necessary for both of them to discover who they really were beneath their old assumptions about success and happiness. Now, as the party wound down and friends began heading home through the warm spring evening, Marcus felt a deep sense of completeness. His consulting business was growing steadily, built on referrals from satisfied clients who appreciated his combination of expertise and integrity. He'd learned to say no to projects that would require sacrificing his personal values, and yes to opportunities that allowed him to use his skills in service of genuine need. The apartment had evolved into a true home, with photographs of friends covering the refrigerator and Calder's various perches positioned to catch sunlight at different times of day. Marcus had started dating again, carefully, with attention to compatibility rather than convenience, and had discovered that relationships built on mutual support felt entirely different from those constructed around shared ambition. But the deepest satisfaction came from the quiet moments with Calder, when the cat would settle in his lap while Marcus read or worked, purring with the contentment of a creature who knew he was exactly where he belonged. "Ready to go home, partner?" Marcus asked as they prepared to leave the diner. Calder responded by walking to his travel carrier and settling inside with familiar routine, amber eyes bright with anticipation for whatever tomorrow might bring. Walking through Asheville's quiet streets, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. Every challenge had been met through connection rather than isolation, every problem solved through community rather than individual struggle. The cat padding beside him had somehow orchestrated an entire network of relationships that had transformed not just Marcus's circumstances, but his understanding of what constituted a meaningful life. At the apartment, Calder claimed his favorite spot on the windowsill while Marcus prepared for bed. The city lights twinkled in the distance, and spring air carried the promise of new growth and fresh possibilities. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, stroking the cat's soft fur, "for finding me when I was lost, for staying when I was broken, for showing me that strength comes from love, not fear." Calder's purr was his only response, but it was enough. It was everything. As Marcus fell asleep that night, he understood with perfect clarity that his story wasn't about losing everything and starting over. It was about discovering that everything he'd thought he wanted had been preventing him from finding what he actually needed. Success wasn't about climbing higher than others. It was about building something lasting with the people who chose to stand beside you. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was Calder's amber eyes, still watchful and protective, keeping guard over dreams that had transformed from desperate hopes into quiet certainties. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new challenges, new opportunities to choose connection over competition. But tonight, in their small apartment filled with the comfortable presence of unconditional love, Marcus Chen and his feline partner slept peacefully, surrounded by the profound satisfaction that comes from a life built on what actually matters: kindness, community, and the patient work of caring for each other through every season of change. In his dreams, Marcus was back on that curb where it all began, but now he wasn't alone. Calder was there, of course, but so were all the others: Helen, Tyler, Mr. Williams, Mrs. Patterson, and dozens of faces representing connections formed through shared vulnerability and mutual support. They formed a circle that stretched beyond the boundaries of sleep, a community that existed wherever people chose love over fear, together over alone. And at the center of it all sat a grey and white cat with amber eyes, purring with the deep satisfaction of work well done, reminding everyone who listened that the smallest gestures of faith can move mountains, one gentle paw at a time.